At 11:47 p.m., my husband quietly slipped out of bed. He thought I was asleep. I kept my breathing slow and steady, my eyes closed, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. But the moment I heard the soft creak of the bedroom door and the faint click of the front door unlocking, my heart started pounding. Because this wasn't the first time. For the past 3 weeks, Daniel had been disappearing in the middle of the night. No explanation. No messages. No reason. Just gone. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe he couldn't sleep and needed a walk. Maybe work stress was getting to him. Maybe I was overthinking things. But that night something felt different. That night, I decided to find out the truth. So I waited 10 seconds after the door closed. Then I got up. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and followed my husband into the night. I wish I hadn't. Because what I discovered that night changed everything about my marriage. Daniel and I had been married for 7 years. 7 comfortable, ordinary years. We met in college, married in our late 20s, and built a quiet life together. We weren't one of those overly passionate couples you see in movies, but we had stability. Routine. Trust. At least, I thought we did. Daniel worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. He was organized, predictable, and not the type to do anything spontaneous. Our lives followed a comfortable pattern: work, dinner together, a show on TV, then bed by 10:30. That was Daniel. Routine was his comfort zone. Which is why the changes started to bother me. It began with his phone. Daniel had never cared about privacy before. His phone would sit on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Sometimes I'd even use it to order food if mine was charging. But suddenly, one day, it had a password. Not just a password. Face ID. And he started keeping it with him everywhere. Bathroom. Garage. Even when taking out the trash. Then came the late-night showers. At first, I thought nothing of it. But soon it became a pattern. Midnight showers. Sometimes even 2 a.m. I'd wake up and hear the water running. When I asked why, he would laugh it off. Just couldn't sleep. Then there were the late-night errands. I'm just stepping out for a bit, he would say casually while grabbing his keys. At midnight? I asked once. He shrugged. Just need some air. He always came back about an hour later. Sometimes longer. And every time I asked where he went, the answer was always vague. Just driving. Just thinking. Just clearing my head. But the worst part? He started acting distant. Not cold. Just distracted. Like his mind was somewhere else. The night I followed him, the air outside was cold and quiet. Our neighborhood was the kind where nothing interesting ever happened. Rows of identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and porch lights glowing softly in the darkness. Daniel was halfway down the street when I stepped outside. He walked quickly but not suspiciously. Just a normal walk. Hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. I stayed far enough behind that he wouldn't hear me. At first, I assumed he was just going for a walk. But after 2 blocks, he didn't turn toward the park like he usually did. Instead, he headed toward the main road. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. A car pulled up beside him. A black sedan. the passenger door opened. And Daniel got inside. My heart started racing. I didn't recognize the car. And I couldn't see who was driving. For a moment, I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My husband was in a stranger's car. At midnight. Without telling me. Every terrible possibility rushed into my head. Was he cheating? Was he in trouble? Was he hiding something dangerous? The car started moving. And without thinking, I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app. 3 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of another car. Follow that black sedan, I told the driver nervously. He laughed. You serious? Please, I said. And somehow, we did. The car drove across town. Not toward downtown. Not toward any bars or restaurants. Instead, it headed toward an older part of the city. A place filled with small houses and quiet streets. Finally, the sedan pulled up in front of a small, worn-looking house with peeling white paint and a dim porch light. Daniel got out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The driver who had picked him up stayed in the car and drove away. Which meant Daniel had arranged that ride beforehand. This wasn't random. He had planned this. I told my driver to stop at the corner. From there, I watched. Daniel walked slowly toward the house. Then he knocked. The door opened. And when I saw who answered it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a little girl. Maybe 6 or 7 years old. She looked up at Daniel with a huge smile. Then she threw her arms around him. And said something that shattered my world. Daddy. I felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. Daddy? My husband didn't have a child. We didn't have children. At least, that's what I thought. Then a woman appeared behind the girl. She looked tired but kind. And when she saw Daniel, she smiled softly. Like someone greeting a loved one. Daniel stepped inside the house. And the door closed. I sat there for what felt like forever. My mind racing. My husband had another child. Another family. How was that even possible? Had he been living a double life? For how long? My hands were shaking as I walked toward the house. I didn't even know what I planned to do. But I knew I couldn't just leave. Not after what I had seen. When I reached the porch, I could hear voices inside. Laughter. The little girl laughing. Daniel's voice. Warm. Gentle. A voice I hadn't heard in weeks. I knocked. The laughter stopped instantly. Footsteps approached the door. And when it opened, Daniel's face turned completely pale. Emily, he whispered. Behind him, the little girl peeked around his leg. Daddy, who is she? I looked straight into my husband's eyes. And asked the question that had been burning inside me. How long? I said quietly. Daniel looked devastated. Emily. I can explain. Explain what? I demanded. Explain why a little girl just called you daddy? The woman stepped forward nervously. Daniel rubbed his face, clearly panicking. Then he said something I never expected. She's my daughter. The words hit like a punch to the chest. My daughter. Since when? I asked. Daniel swallowed hard. Since before we met. My brain struggled to process it. You had a child before our marriage? He nodded slowly. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked. Tears started forming in his eyes. Because I didn't know about her. The room went silent. The woman finally spoke. I only found Daniel 3 months ago, she said gently. She explained everything. Years ago, she and Daniel had a brief relationship. They were young. It ended quickly. And shortly afterward, she moved away. She didn't know she was pregnant until months later. By the time she tried to contact him, he had already changed numbers and moved cities. Life moved on. She raised the little girl alone. Until 3 months ago. When she finally tracked him down. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. I didn't know how to tell you, he said. I was scared. I thought you'd think I was lying. So instead, I said bitterly, you snuck out every night to visit your secret daughter? He nodded slowly. I just wanted to get to know her first. The little girl looked confused. Daddy, are you in trouble? Daniel crouched down and hugged her tightly. No, sweetheart. But my heart was breaking. Not because he had a daughter. But because he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. We stood there in silence. Finally, the little girl looked up at me curiously. Are you Daddy's friend? I looked at Daniel. Then back at her. And for the first time that night, I saw the fear in his eyes. Fear that I might walk away. Fear that this secret had destroyed everything. I took a slow breath. And said something none of us expected. I'm his wife. The little girl's eyes widened. Does that mean you're my stepmom? For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel whispered quietly. Only if she wants to be. I looked around the small house. At the tired mother. At the hopeful little girl. At my terrified husband. And realized something. This wasn't betrayal. This was fear. Fear that the truth would destroy us. But maybe, just maybe, the truth could also build something new. I looked at the little girl and smiled softly. Maybe, I said. And that night, instead of losing my husband, I discovered a family I never knew I had.